When we talk about the most dangerous carb in the world, most people instinctively imagine something obvious, something they can point to on a plate. But the real problem isn't the carb you see, it's the carb you don't see. It's the one that slips into your meals quietly, disguised, hidden, blended, dissolved, and renamed so many times that even the most health-conscious person ends up consuming it without realizing it. And that's where the trouble begins. Because when something is invisible, you have no reason to monitor it, no reason to question it, and no reason to limit it. You simply trust the food in front of you, thinking you're making a normal choice, when in reality, you're being pushed into a metabolic trap that millions of people fall into every single day. This carb shows up in places you wouldn't expect. You think you're eating something savory, but it's there. You think you're choosing something low-fat, but it's there. You switch to something labeled healthy, and it's still there. Why? Because food manufacturers know exactly what they're doing. They know how to hide it behind friendly names, how to slip it into sauces, dressings, breads, cereals, bars, drinks, and snacks. They understand human taste preferences better than most people understand their own bodies. They know that if they add just the right form of this carb, your brain lights up, your appetite wakes up, and you come back for more. Sometimes immediately, sometimes later that same day, sometimes every single day. And the tragedy is that most people don't even notice. They'll say, "I don't eat sweets," while unknowingly consuming the metabolic equivalent of multiple spoonfuls of the same substance they think they're avoiding. That's why this carb is so dangerous. It doesn't look dangerous, it doesn't taste dangerous, it doesn't carry a warning label, it blends in, shapeshifts, and adapts depending on the type of food it's paired with. It gets absorbed quickly, digested instantly, and delivered straight into the bloodstream like a biochemical shockwave. And once that shockwave hits, everything else in your body has to react. Your pancreas reacts, your liver reacts, your appetite reacts, your fat cells react, even your energy levels and mood react. One hidden ingredient, one tiny moment of sweetness or softness or texture, suddenly becomes the trigger for hours of hormonal turbulence. People often tell themselves, it's just a small amount. But the problem is that the small amount repeats itself over and over throughout the day. A little in your breakfast, a little in your coffee, a little in your snack, a little in your lunch, a little in your drink, a little in your dinner. By the time the day ends, it's not small anymore. It's a mountain of metabolic stress disguised as convenience and flavor, and because you never saw it clearly, you never knew how much power it had over your health. What makes this carb even more dangerous is the illusion of normalcy. Everyone around you is eating it. Your family eats it. Your co-workers eat it. Your friends eat it. It's at every gathering, every party, every celebration, and every restaurant. When something becomes normal, it stops being questioned. But think about how many normal things in society have turned out to be harmful once we look more closely. This is no different. The only reason this carb still dominates our diets is because it blends into the culture so well that nobody stops long enough to ask whether it should be there at all. And that's the moment everything changes. When you pause, when you examine, when you finally notice what has been silently steering your health for years. Once you understand how often this carb appears, how quickly it spikes your insulin, how strongly it fuels cravings, and how deeply it affects your liver, you stop seeing food the same way. You begin to recognize patterns, you catch the hidden ingredients, you challenge the labels, and you finally give your body the break it has been begging for. Because awareness is the first step. You can't remove what you cannot see, but once you see it, once you understand how it sneaks in, once you realize how much damage a seemingly harmless ingredient can do when it's eaten every single day, the path forward becomes clear. You're no longer controlled by the hidden carb. You're no longer tricked by labels. You're no longer playing a game you don't even know you're in. You're finally in charge. And the moment you take charge, everything in your health begins to shift. That's the power of seeing what was once invisible. If there's one thing I want you to truly understand on a deeper level, it's how quickly this carb can spike your insulin. Most people have heard the word insulin so many times that it almost loses meaning, but the truth is, insulin is the switch that decides what your body does next. It determines whether you burn fat or store it, whether you feel hungry or satisfied, whether your energy stays stable or crashes an hour later. And this one carb we've been talking about, has the unique ability to flip that switch faster and harder than almost anything else you put in your mouth. It doesn't matter if you're young, old, active, sedentary, stressed, or relaxed, your body responds to this carb in milliseconds. The moment it touches your tongue, receptors send signals to your brain, and your pancreas is already preparing for what's coming. Then, once it hits your bloodstream, insulin surges like an alarm system being triggered. Not a gentle rise, not a mild nudge, an immediate spike. And that spike forces your body into one mode: storage. Your cells open up like empty warehouses, grabbing every molecule they can and pulling sugar out of the bloodstream as fast as possible. At first, it might even feel good. You get a temporary burst of energy, a little lift in mood, a sense of satisfaction. But that feeling is short-lived because the spike is followed by a crash. And that crash is where the real problems begin. Your brain senses the drop and sends you a message: eat more. But it doesn't ask for vegetables or protein. It asks for the same carb that caused the spike in the first place. This is the loop most people get trapped in without realizing it. You start your day with this carb, your insulin shoots up, it crashes down, and suddenly you're hungry again. Hungry even when you just ate. You feel it's your appetite misbehaving, but it's not appetite. It's biology reacting to a sudden drop in blood sugar. And the more often you repeat this cycle, the more your body becomes dependent on quick hits of sugar to function day to day. Over time, your cells get tired. They stop responding as well to insulin because they've been bombarded with it for years. Think of someone knocking on your door once in a while. You answer immediately. But imagine someone pounding on that door all day, every day. Eventually, you stop responding. Your cells do the same. They become resistant. And when that happens, your pancreas has to produce even more insulin just to handle the same amount of carbs. This is where weight gain accelerates. This is where stubborn belly fat forms. This is where energy drops, cravings intensify, and metabolic problems begin to stack up silently. What's amazing is that people blame themselves. They think they lack discipline, or they don't have willpower, or something is wrong with them because they keep craving the same foods. But it's not them, it's the hormonal roller coaster driven by a carb the modern food system taught them to eat at every meal. When insulin is constantly high, your body stays in storage mode. You can exercise, you can diet, you can cut calories, but as long as insulin remains elevated, your body refuses to burn its own fat because it's waiting for the next incoming spike. And this is why so many people struggle with weight, fatigue, and cravings despite putting in effort. They're trying to fight their own physiology. They're trying to lose weight in a hormonal environment built for fat storage. You can't win that battle. You have to change the environment. You have to stop triggering insulin like a switch stuck in the on position. And the only way to do that is by identifying and removing the carb that spikes it the fastest. Once you pull that carb out, or even just reduce it significantly, you'll feel the difference almost immediately. Your hunger calms down, your energy becomes smoother, your cravings lose their grip. You stop thinking about food all day. Your body starts reaching into its stored fat for fuel, something it hasn't been able to do properly in years. That's when people say they feel lighter, clearer, more stable, not because of motivation or willpower, but because their insulin finally gets a break. This is the moment everything starts to change. When you stop feeding the spike stops controlling you. When that insulin spike keeps happening over and over, it doesn't just affect your energy or appetite, it begins to create a chain reaction inside your body that touches almost every organ. And the first place that feels the impact is the liver. Most people don't realize this, but the liver is like the traffic controller of your entire metabolic system. Everything you eat, everything you absorb, every sugar molecule that enters your bloodstream eventually gets processed by the liver. So when this carb keeps flooding your system, the liver becomes overwhelmed. It can't burn it fast enough, it can't store it safely, and it can't keep up with the constant demand being placed on it. At first, the liver tries to help you by turning the excess sugar into glycogen, but glycogen storage is small. Once that fills up, the liver has no choice but to convert the remaining sugar into fat. And that fat doesn't just sit around harmlessly, it begins to accumulate inside the liver itself. Bit by bit, layer by layer, meal by meal, tiny fat droplets start filling up the liver cells. This is how fatty liver develops. Not from alcohol, not from overeating fat, but from chronic exposure to a carb that enters the bloodstream too quickly and too frequently. And the saddest part is that most people who have fatty liver feel nothing. No pain, no alarm, no symptoms. It progresses silently for years while energy drops, belly fat increases, and the body slowly loses its ability to regulate blood sugar. Once the liver becomes overloaded, the next domino falls, your cells lose their sensitivity to insulin. The constant surge of insulin forces the cells to shut down their receptors, almost like putting their hands up saying, "Enough." So now your pancreas has to pump even more insulin just to get the same job done. And that pushes you deeper into insulin resistance, the condition at the root of type 2 diabetes. This is why people who think they're just tired or just gaining weight with age are often dealing with something far more serious, because insulin resistance affects the brain, the arteries, the muscles, and even the immune system. But the chain reaction doesn't stop there. As your liver becomes overworked and insulin stays high, the body enters a state of chronic inflammation. You may not see it, but you feel it. It shows up as joint pain, fatigue, swelling, brain fog, and stubborn weight that refuses to budge no matter what you try. It shows up as digestive issues, sleep problems, and afternoon crashes. It shows up as high blood pressure, elevated triglycerides, and low HDL. These aren't random symptoms, they are signals, early warnings, that your body is struggling under the weight of a metabolic imbalance caused by one carb that keeps entering your system faster than you can handle. Inflammation then feeds into yet another problem: fat storage around the abdomen. This type of fat isn't just sitting there, it behaves like an active organ, releasing inflammatory chemicals that make the whole situation worse. So now you have a cycle where the carb triggers insulin, insulin increases fat storage, fat creates inflammation, and inflammation creates even more insulin resistance. And all of this started with a carb that was supposed to give you energy but ends up draining your health instead. People often think that metabolic disease is something that just appears out of nowhere one day, but it doesn't. It builds gradually. It builds with every hidden ingredient, every insulin spike, every extra gram the liver has to convert to fat. And because the effects are delayed, people assume they're fine, until they're suddenly not. That's the deceptive power of this carb. It doesn't hurt immediately, it doesn't warn you, it slowly nudges your metabolism off balance until you reach a point where you're tired all the time, you're gaining weight without changing your diet, you're craving foods you never used to crave, and your body feels like it's not working the way it used to. But the good news is that the chain reaction works in reverse too. When you reduce the carb, insulin drops. When insulin drops, the liver starts releasing fat instead of storing it. Inflammation decreases, blood sugar stabilizes, cravings calm down. The body begins healing from the inside out. You don't need perfection, you just need to interrupt the pattern long enough for your body to reset. And that's when you realize how powerful one change can be, because breaking the chain is how you reclaim your health. One of the most misunderstood parts of this entire equation is why cutting this carb feels so difficult. People think it's just a matter of discipline, or motivation, or being stronger than their cravings. But the truth is far deeper than that. This carb doesn't just show up in your blood, it shows up in your brain. It taps into your reward pathways in a way that makes you want more even when your stomach is full, even when you've promised yourself you'd stop, even when you know it's hurting your health. And that's why so many people feel stuck. Because the pull isn't psychological weakness, it's biochemical conditioning. Every time you eat this carb, your brain releases dopamine. Not a tiny amount, not a mild flicker, an intense, rapid release that gives you a brief feeling of pleasure or satisfaction. But that moment passes, and when it does, your brain remembers how quickly that dopamine hit arrived. So the next time you feel stressed, tired, bored, or even just emotionally off balance, your brain tells you, go get the thing that made us feel better last time. And for most people, that thing is this carb. This is why people don't crave vegetables when they're upset. They crave foods engineered to deliver that instant hit. And make no mistake, engineered is the right word. Food manufacturers know the science behind cravings better than most people know themselves. They intentionally pair this carb with fats, salts, and flavor enhancers to create combinations that overwhelm your natural satiety signals. Your brain can't calculate the nutritional cost because the food is designed to bypass the body's usual stop signs. You're not overeating because you're careless. You're overeating because the food is chemically crafted to make you do exactly that. Once this pattern repeats enough times, it becomes wired into your habits. You reach for these foods automatically, almost without thinking. You're not making a conscious choice. You're following a neurological pathway built meal by meal, snack by snack, craving by craving. And because this carb absorbs so rapidly, your blood sugar reacts just as fast. The spike comes quickly, the crash follows right behind it, and suddenly you're hungry again even though you shouldn't be. That hunger isn't real hunger. It's withdrawal from a sudden drop in dopamine and blood sugar at the same time. And that combination makes the craving feel urgent, almost physical. People often say, I feel addicted to carbs. And the truth is that they're not wrong. Studies have shown the same dopamine circuits involved in other forms of addiction light up when this carb enters the system. So when someone tries to cut it out abruptly, their brain protests. It asks for the same reward. It pushes for the familiar pattern. This is why the first few days of reducing this carb can feel like a battle, not because your willpower is weak, but because your brain chemistry is recalibrating. Another layer to this is emotional dependence. Food becomes comfort. It becomes distraction. It becomes a reward at the end of a long day. When you remove that carb, you're not just changing your diet, you're changing how you cope, how you reward yourself, how you soothe yourself. And without understanding this, people assume they're failing, when what's really happening is their brain is adjusting to a new way of functioning. Over time, as insulin levels start to stabilize and the liver gets a break, something incredible happens. The cravings lose their intensity. The mental fog lifts. The emotional pull begins to weaken. You stop thinking about food constantly. You stop searching the kitchen for something sweet after meals. You start feeling satisfied without overeating. You start enjoying foods you used to overlook. Your palate resets, your hormones rebalance, and your brain no longer depends on quick sugar hits to feel normal. But this shift doesn't happen by accident. It happens when you understand the mechanism, when you accept that cravings aren't character flaws, and when you realize that the food pushing you toward those cravings was engineered to have exactly that effect. Once you see the pattern, you can break the pattern. And when you break the pattern, you break the cycle. That's when you take back control from the carb that has been controlling you. One of the biggest misconceptions people have is that removing this carb means giving up all the foods they love. And the moment they hear that, their mind shuts down. They think, I can't do this, before they even begin. But the truth is, the body doesn't need drastic, painful changes. It responds beautifully to small, smart swaps. Changes so simple that you almost don't notice them, but your metabolism notices immediately. And once you understand how powerful those swaps can be, you stop feeling deprived and start feeling empowered. Most people think they have to overhaul their entire diet, but that's not necessary. You don't need a complicated plan, you don't need to starve yourself, and you don't need to eliminate every pleasure from your meals. What you need is to replace the carb that spikes your insulin with foods that give you energy without punching your pancreas in the face. And when you do that, your insulin calms down, your cravings settle, and your body begins healing. Even if the rest of your diet stays the same. Start with breakfast, because breakfast is where most people unknowingly sabotage their entire day. They reach for cereal, toast, pastries, fruit juices, foods that look innocent but are loaded with this dangerous carb. Instead, imagine swapping that for eggs, yogurt with no added sugar, a vegetable omelette, or even something as simple as a handful of nuts and a piece of cheese. The difference in how your body responds is enormous. You go from an immediate insulin spike to steady, stable energy that lasts for hours. That one change can eliminate the mid-morning crash, the constant snacking, and the craving for something sweet before lunchtime. Then look at what you drink, because drinks are one of the most deceptive sources of this carb. Whether it's soda, energy drinks, sweetened coffee, or bottled juices, your body treats them like liquid sugar bombs. But the swap is simple: water, sparkling water, unsweetened tea, black coffee, or coffee with a splash of cream. These options don't spike your insulin, they don't crash your energy, they don't trigger cravings, and the best part is, they're effortless. You don't have to cook, you don't have to prep, you don't have to learn anything new, you just replace one bottle with another. Next, look at sauces, dressings, and condiments. People don't realize how much sugar hides in these. Ketchup, barbecue sauces, sweet dressings, they all contain forms of this carb disguised under different names. Instead, choose mustard, olive oil, vinegar, lemon, herbs, or a simple homemade dressing. These swaps don't just lower your insulin, they improve the flavor of your meals without dragging your metabolism into a spike crash cycle. And you don't have to give up snacks. You just have to choose snacks that don't hijack your blood sugar. Swap chips for nuts. Swap cookies for a handful of berries. Swap sugary granola bars for cheese sticks, olives, or even a few squares of dark chocolate with no added sugar. These changes are small, but they break the cycle of craving after craving after craving. They give your brain the fuel it needs without lighting up your reward centers like a slot machine. Even your meals don't have to feel restrictive. If you love rice, try cauliflower rice a few days a week. If you love pasta, try a vegetable-based version occasionally. If you love bread, choose a high-fiber, low-sugar alternative. The goal isn't to eliminate everything you enjoy. The goal is to reduce the constant bombardment of insulin spikes so your body can finally breathe. What surprises most people is how quickly they notice the difference. Within days, their hunger starts to fade, not because they're eating less, but because their blood sugar stays stable. Their energy stops fluctuating. Their mind feels clearer. Their bloating reduces. They sleep better. They no longer walk around thinking about food all the time. This is the power of simple swaps. They shift your biology without making you feel like you're fighting against your own habits. And even better, these swaps build momentum. Once you start feeling better, you naturally want to continue. You don't feel forced, you feel motivated, you feel in control, and for the first time in a long time, food stops being the enemy and becomes something that supports your health instead of harming it. You don't need perfection, you don't need a strict diet, you just need to make choices that calm your insulin rather than set it on fire. And when you do that, even one meal at a time, everything in your metabolic health begins to shift from frustration to freedom. When you finally remove this carb, or even cut it down significantly, something remarkable begins to happen inside your body, and it happens far quicker than most people expect. For years, you may have felt tired, bloated, hungry all the time, struggling with cravings you never understood, thinking it was just part of getting older or part of having a busy life. But the truth is, much of that wasn't age or lifestyle. It was the constant metabolic stress caused by this carb flooding your system every single day. And once you take it away, even for a short period, the body wastes no time showing you what it feels like to function without that burden. The first thing people notice is a shift in energy. Not the jittery, short-lived burst that comes from a sugar spike, but a calm, steady, reliable energy that lasts throughout the day. You wake up without that heavy, foggy feeling. You don't drag yourself through the morning. Your brain feels clearer, like someone finally turned the brightness up inside your head. This isn't magic. It's your insulin stabilizing, your liver taking a breath, and your cells finally using fuel the way they were designed to. Then cravings begin to fade. Not slowly, not months later, often within days. It's almost surprising because you realize how much of your day used to revolve around food. Thinking about the next meal, the next snack, the next sweet bite. But once the blood sugar roller coaster stops, your appetite becomes predictable again. You eat because you're genuinely hungry, not because your hormones are pulling you in 5 different directions. That mental freedom alone can feel life-changing. Another change that people experience quickly is reduced bloating. When this carb is constantly in your system, your body retains more water, your gut becomes inflamed, and your digestion slows down. But once the carb is out of the way, the inflammation quiets down, your stomach feels lighter, clothes fit better, and that uncomfortable abdominal pressure begins to disappear. It's often the first visible sign that your metabolism is shifting in the right direction. As the days go by, your liver starts releasing the stored fat it had been holding on to for years. Remember, the liver was overwhelmed because it had no choice but to convert excess sugar into fat. Once that sugar stops coming in, the liver begins to do the opposite. It starts burning the fat it stored. This is why some people see the scale move within a week without drastically cutting calories. The body isn't fighting against itself anymore. It's finally doing what it's supposed to do. And it doesn't end there. Your mood stabilizes, your sleep improves, Your skin often looks clearer because inflammation drops. Even your joints may feel better because insulin and inflammation are closely connected. It's as if your entire internal environment shifts from chaos to coordination. And it all starts with removing one carb that had been silently steering your biology for years. Surprises most people is how hopeful they feel once they experience these changes. For so long, they thought something was wrong with them. They believed they were destined to struggle, destined to battle weight, craving, fatigue, and frustration forever. But then they realize it wasn't failure, it was chemistry. And once the chemistry shifts, they see results they never thought were possible. This is why just 7 days can be so powerful. It's long enough for the body to show you what life feels like without the constant insulin spikes. Once you taste that freedom, you don't want to go back to feeling bloated, tired, hungry, and controlled by food. And this is where momentum builds. You start making better choices not because you're forcing yourself, but because your body rewards you for them. The cycle reverses. Instead of cravings leading to more cravings, stable energy leads to more stability. Instead of overeating because of hormonal chaos, you eat appropriately because your hunger signals finally make sense. You stop battling your body and start working with it. 7 days is often all it takes to realize how much of your life was being dictated by one hidden carb you never even noticed. And once you feel what your body can do without it, you understand that your health was never out of reach. It was simply waiting for you to remove the thing holding it back. That's the moment you step into a new level of control. Because once you feel the difference, you never forget the difference.